Hello and welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. Today I wanted to take a look at another one of the Gnostic Gospels, sometimes also called the Secret Gospels. And the reason for that is because they were hidden from view. The the canonized texts that you see in the Bible were those that were agreed by the bishops during the period of Constantine's rule that were allowed to appear in the Bible. And everything else was considered to be heresy. As time went on, anything considered to be heresy would result in the possessor of those documents or those writings being killed for being a heretic. And so they became a secret sort of roadmap that would be worshipped by Christians that didn't believe in the canonized texts being the only texts. And it wasn't until the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt in around the mid 20th century that these secret gospels were even known by our current modern societies. And so they are a fascinating breed. I previously did episodes which I examined on this show in quite a lot of detail, the teachings that derive from other Gnostic Gospels, two in particular, the Gospel of Mary, Mary Magdalene, and also the Gospel of Thomas. I'm going to make sure that there are links to both of those episodes in the description for today's show because they were fascinating episodes, and the Gospels, both of them had different, quite profound messages to share that kind of often I think get lost when you're reading the prose that's complicated. You have to kind of sit and really immerse yourself to understand what they're saying. But once you do, they really are quite profound. Very briefly, though, I'm going to give you a quick outline of both Mary and Thomas to get us started on today's show. The Gospel of Mary, Mary Magdalene, talks about how each of us is already complete. We don't need anything other than ourselves to be able to recognize the truth about life and reality. And once we find that truth which resides inside us, we will finally know everything that we need to know in order to find peace. Mary says that she became enlightened when she discovered that here on earth, in this material plane, we are constantly being distracted by 7 powerful dark forces that are designed to keep us away from our own power as people, as members of humanity, and that our power is infinite and eternal, and it comes from the light inside us which illuminates the truth. The 7 dark forces are things, if you don't already know what they are, you will immediately recognize them when you see them. And so I'm not going to spoil it for you by rehashing a cheapened kind of version of my previous episode on the Gospel of Mary. If you are interested in understanding the details of the 7 powers, how we fall for them, and what Mary learned in her one-to-one discussions with Jesus according to her gospel, then I recommend going back and listening to that entire episode of the Gospel of Mary, which the link for which is in the description for today's show. But as I mentioned when I first introduced the Gospel of Mary as the first episode of the Gnostic text that I covered, I actually found it to have had quite a profound impact on me as an individual. I had already read the entire Bible just recently. I made a point of reading the Bible through audio over the course of 1 year, every single book of the Bible. And after reading the Bible, I'm afraid I didn't do it from a religious standpoint. I did it just because I was curious. I'd never done it before. And so I was curious and I wanted to know what exactly is being discussed here and how do I take it as a person who's reading it in the same way that I would be reading any other book. And after reading the Bible, I really just felt as though something was off. Like it actually is not what it's represented to be. I actually now believe that whether people agree or not, I believe, and I'm still looking to put the pieces like a jigsaw together on this. But I actually believe that the Bible is a story about aliens and their interaction with humanity. And it also has on top of it layers of corruption and misinterpretation and distraction in order to serve purposes that are probably generational. You know, this person added this and this person added that and that kind of thing. But when I read the Gospel of Mary, strangely, everything seemed to click. I haven't been the same since then. I haven't found religion or anything like that. Nothing has really changed. I'm still very much the same person. But suddenly it makes sense. And so now everything begins to make sense, like it's all kind of clicking together. And that means everything has changed. I don't feel as though I'm sort of lost in this maze of trying to find the answer. I feel as though I'm getting the answer and I just have to continue to persevere. And it's because of this Gospel of Mary. It was very profound, really strange. And I guess that's really about the only way that I can describe it. I have no intention of going back to how I was. So it's not like anything major has happened. It's just a shift in perspective. And it was because of the Gospel of Mary. So I'll talk about this some other time, but for now, that's basically Mary's Gospel in a nutshell. And of course, you can check out the entire video, the entire episode yourself. The Gospel of Thomas was equally profound in a totally different way. It talked about how the placement of everything that we've been taught to believe is actually one of the distractions that we have to face as humans here on earth, and that religion is a construct created by man that takes us away from our enlightenment. So it actually takes us in the opposite direction of where we're supposed to be going. As soon as we see the light and we realize this, we instantly begin to travel back in the correct direction and rectify this misalignment of our purpose and our path. But the Gospel of Thomas also talks about God in a brand new way. And after studying it, well, in a brand new way, it's thousands of years old, but after studying it, I think that there's a message there that states that God or whatever preceded God, because something may have actually preceded God, if anything, is actually the same thing that what Einstein's theory of special relativity is all about, strangely enough. Except I don't think that science has quite caught up to the Gospel of Thomas yet. I know that sounds really arrogant of me to say that, and I'm sure any scientists listening, if there are any, are thinking, what on earth is this woman talking about? So very quickly, let me just explain. I think that Einstein's special equation of E equals mc squared is talking about energy and mass and the speed of light. The E in the equation stands for the energy, the m is the mass, and the c squared is the speed of light. However, in the Gospel of Thomas, I think the answer goes beyond what science has discovered with E equals mc squared so far. And I think that the Gospel, in the Gospel, reality or God, or whatever created God, is actually E equals mc squared. But the E in the equation that stands for energy also stands for the heavenly or spiritual aspects of reality. The M stands for mass, but this is actually matter, and so the material aspects of reality. And the c squared relates to frequency. That's what I think. So it's spirituality equals materiality and frequency, or multiplied by frequency. And I think that's what this is. Science has actually found a relationship between the speed of light and frequency in the realm of quantum physics, but they haven't quite caught up yet to Gospel of Thomas. Maybe in another 2,000 years they will be on par. I don't know. I know I'm being really cheeky, and the Gospel of Thomas does not obviously look like a science blurb, but when you look at it from the perspective that I did in the episode in which I covered it, it's sort of looks as though what he's talking about is spirituality equals the material world multiplied by its frequency. You see how simple that is? So we'll wait. We'll wait for science to catch up. Okay. I am really glad that I studied the Gospel of Thomas after I'd studied the Gospel of Mary. I'm glad that I did Mary first, because I'm not actually sure if I would have been able to understand Thomas in the same way if I hadn't looked at Mary first. And so today, let's do a third one. We're going to be looking at the Gospel of John, another one of the Gnostic texts. And so, yes, you can find the episodes of the previous. You don't need to have seen them in order to listen or watch today's episode. But, you know, it's a nice go-to for some time when you have an extra hour or so to spare to go and listen to those episodes as well. Today we'll be talking about that secret or Gnostic Gospel of John. And this is a long and detailed gospel that covers a very wide range of subjects or topics. So I'm actually not going to be bothering trying to squeeze it into one episode. I'm going to break it down into 2 episodes. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at John. We're going to be looking at John's placement in the gospel and the concepts of things like reality and the source of creation and how everything that exists began and where it all started. And then in next week's episode, we're going to be looking at some of the more specific parts of the gospel that carry unique messages about the creation of the cosmos and of Earth and humanity, our purpose and our future. So let's begin. Okay. So the Gospel of John that appears in the Gnostic text is not the same as the one that appears in the Bible, in the New Testament. This Gnostic or secret gospel centers around the disciple, one of Jesus' disciples, John. So it is the same person. John and his brother James were both chosen to be disciples of Jesus. They had been working with their father, Zebedee, I think is his name, in a family business, but they left that business to follow Jesus and to be his disciples. Zebedee, the father, doesn't feature very much in the Bible, but from what I was able to see, he was highly supportive of his 2 sons following Jesus. He was quite happy to let them go to do that. And the disciple John is a key apostle in the Christian tradition. In canonized texts, the Gospel of John appears in the New Testament, as I said, and it shows him to be one of the 4 evangelists. He's often symbolized by the eagle, and in biblical reference that takes place, but also in tarot. So he appears in 2 tarot cards, which is Wheel of Fortune and the World, where he appears as an eagle. So yeah, that's just linking what I do on the Ellie channel to what we're talking about today. In the Bible, in the canonized text, John's focus is on the life and ministry of Jesus, okay? The divine nature of Jesus, his miracles, his teachings, the significance of his death and his resurrection, according to the Christian teachings. Basically, the key themes of the Gospel of John in the canonized scripture is all about the Word of God, this light versus darkness kind of element, and identifying and confirming that Jesus is the Son of God. Okay, but in the Gnostic gospel that forms the secret gospel that forms part of the Gnostic teachings, John's focus is different. In this gospel, basically John is describing what happens after the resurrection of Jesus. And this is a time when Jesus went from being a wise man who traveled around spreading the word. He may have even been a special man, right, of some kind. When he died, he came back to life as a supernatural powered man, so a different kind of a man than he was before his death. After he came back, after he was resurrected, he could shapeshift, he could walk through walls, he could fly, and he was a man who shared secrets with John about the hidden truths of the cosmos and the purpose of humanity. As with the other Gnostic Gospels that I've covered on the show so far, being Mary and Thomas, the secret or Gnostic Gospel of John is focused on the emphasis of secret knowledge and spiritual revelation that can be found inside us. So nowhere else, just inside us. So the story begins with John encountering a fellow by the name of Arminius, and Arminius was a Pharisee. Now the term Pharisee actually is used to describe a kind of an Orthodox Jewish faith system that dates back to the 1st and 2nd century BC. Those individuals within that Jewish faith who were highly ritualistic and spent most of their energy praying outwardly. They were very strict about having to adhere to certain types of rituals, and that's why they were called Pharisees. They worshipped physical actions and rituals related to their faith. The Pharisees did not believe in the concept of looking inward for answers, not in the same way that the secret Gospels describe. They were focused on attending temple, transacting their faith in physical ways, and this may include things like animal sacrifice or memorizing passages to demonstrate their faith, or denying themselves physical comforts or something to be able to prove themselves, rather than trying to learn what exists inside themselves. When John met this Pharisee, Arminius, he left the conversation pretty distraught and upset and a bit confused, because the Pharisee had spoken really harshly about Jesus, and he told John that Jesus was leading him astray. And this was a really typical accusation at the time, when Christian followers and Jewish authorities were in disagreement about the truth, about God and faith. The Pharisee accused Jesus of being deceitful, and this really upset John. So John goes to find a quiet place to reflect on his discussion and kind of consider the way he feels. He goes to a really quiet mountain in the distance to be alone with his thoughts, and he questions his beliefs, the mission of Jesus, and the entire concept of reality. He's looking for understanding and clarity in his mind. And then he has this kind of a vision. He experiences what he believes to be a divine vision while he's alone in desperate contemplation. He sees a figure appear in front of him. Now, he's in desperate contemplation here. That's something that is specifically stated in the gospel. And this is something that's quite common about this visitation of something that seems visionary, like a vision or an angelic presence, during this sense of desperate kind of grief or loss or powerlessness. I think that's really interesting. In John's instance, he sees this figure appear in front of him, and the figure appears to transition or shift from being a small child to an elderly person, and then it transitions again back, or transforms back to a young adult. And John interprets this vision to be like a message of divine truth. Like, regardless of who you are, or what you are, or where you are in your life's journey, the truth is always the truth, and it's incorruptible. That's the sense that he gets from this vision. I'm using the Mayer translation, which I have found on, I think the website is gnosis.org. And there are a variety of different translations when it comes to the Gnostic texts. But Mayer, which is Meyer, is the one that I'm using today. And there's a note by the translator here that also I want to mention. Mayer makes a note that the three transitions of the figure that John sees in his vision might be demonstrating the concept of the Holy Trinity of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. But I'm not sure, whether how I feel about that, because that's not something that distinctly appears in the gospel. So this is the way it's interpreted by the translator. But there is a possibility that that's the case. And if you can hear some humming in the background, it's because it always happens. Whenever I turn on record on anything, somebody decides to trim their hedges. So I apologize for that. So it might be right, but I think it actually it puts an extra layer on the interpretation, and I want to be really careful about that and kind of keep an open mind about it. I think the simplest interpretation by John is probably the most grounded. I like to remind people that, I adhere to the Judge Judy perspective, and that is that the simplest version of events that you can provide an explanation is probably the truthful version of events. And so we just know that John saw a vision that transitioned from baby to elderly to a younger person, and the understanding he got from that transition. Anyway, following this vision, John feels reassured by what he sees. It seems to address his doubts and his fears. He realizes that he is the embodiment of each of the figures that he's seen in this vision. He is the father and the mother and the child. He is an embodiment of the divine, and he is complete and he is unified. So he knows that the rituals and the temples and the sacrifices that take place, they aren't the road to truth. Just existing is the truth, and he exists, and therefore he is the truth. That's his revelation. The vision also includes a message to John to share what he's discovered with others, that they are already perfect, that everyone is already perfect, and that we don't need to prove ourselves to be accepted by God. So all of these ritualistic things are just a waste of effort, and they distract us from what's real, because we're already accepted. Okay. Now, of course, that is the complete opposite of what the Bible says. The Bible says all kinds of things, but the Bible is continuously throughout the Old and the New Testament telling us that we need to prove ourselves and that we need to demonstrate our faith in order to be accepted into heaven. And that if we don't do it, we're not going to heaven, you see. And heaven is where you're supposed to go after you die. So if you don't go, there's only one other place to be. So it's actually very harsh kind of language. But it's the exact opposite of what appears in this Gnostic text. So now John feels restored by a simple truth. He went to the mountain feeling lost, and he left the mountain feeling spiritually enlightened and whole again, which is quite nice. So before John leaves the mountain, he's thankful for the vision, but he wants to know where it came from. And he receives an answer that the vision came from the One, and it's just named to be the One. John didn't understand what was meant by the One, so he asked, what is the One? What might it be? I'm going to read the answer as it appears in the Mayer translation of the Gospel of John. It's a little bit lengthy, but it's better to read out the entire thing so that you can see how it appears in the Gospel, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion about it after I've read it out. So bear with me, it is a little bit long. So John says the following: I asked if I might understand this, and it said to me, the One is a sovereign that has nothing over it. It is God and Father of all, the invisible One that is over all, that is incorruptible, that is pure light at which no eyes can gaze. The One is the invisible Spirit. We should not think of it as a god or godlike, for it is greater than a god, because it has nothing over it and no Lord above it. It does not exist within anything inferior to it, since everything exists within it alone. It is eternal, since it does not need anything. For it is absolutely correct. It has never lacked anything in order to be completed by it. Rather, it is always absolutely complete in light. The One is illimitable, since there is nothing before it to limit it. Unfathomable, since there is nothing before it to fathom it. Immeasurable, since there was nothing before it to measure it. Invisible, since nothing has seen it. Eternal, since it exists eternally. Unutterable, since nothing could comprehend it to utter it. Unnameable, since there is nothing before it to give it a name. The One is the immeasurable light, pure, holy, immaculate. The One is unutterable and is perfect in incorruptibility. Not that it is part of perfection or blessedness or divinity, it is much greater. The One is not corporeal and is not incorporeal. The One is not large and it is not small. It is impossible to say. How much is it? What kind is it? For no one can understand it. The One is not among the things that exist, but it is much greater. Not that it is greater, rather, as it is in itself, it is not a part of the eternal realms or of life. For whatever is part of a realm was once prepared by another. Time was not allotted to it, since it receives nothing from anyone. What would be received would be on loan. The One who is first does not need to receive anything from another. Such a one beholds itself in its light. The One is majestic and has an immeasurable purity. The One is a realm that gives a realm, life that gives life, a blessed one that gives blessedness, knowledge that gives knowledge, a good one that gives goodness, mercy that gives mercy and redemption, grace that gives grace. Not as if the One possesses all of this. Rather, it is that the One gives immeasurable and incomprehensible light. What shall I tell you about it? Its eternal realm is incorruptible, at peace, dwelling in silence, at rest before everything. It is the head of all realms, and it sustains them through its goodness. We would not know what is ineffable. We would not understand what is immeasurable were it not for what has come from the Father. This is the One who has told these things to us alone. Good grief, what a passage. What an incredible passage. It's like a maze of information. When I was reading this out and wondering to myself if I should read it word for word on today's show, do you know what it sounded like to me? It sounded a little bit in the maze-like kind of poetic way that it reads. It felt like I was reading the ones and the zeros from that Matrix movie, like I'm reading code, like a matrix code that either is or isn't, that either is an absolute yes or an absolute no. That's what it felt like when I was reading it, except it's described in the Gnostic Gospel of John like it's both a yes and a no at the same time. I think it's really quite a profound passage. In previous episodes, I talked about a book. It's the book of Zohar, which is the most important book of divine wisdom in the mystic Jewish faith of Kabbalah. Saying, and the book of Zohar says something very similar about the original source that came before everything else, came before God. And as mentioned in my previous episodes, the original ancient Hebrew translation of the very first sentence in the book of Genesis, which is reinterpreted by the book of Zohar, changes the meaning of the entire concept of reality. So, for example, so demonstrate this. The English translation that we read in the Bible makes it appear as though the first sentence of Genesis says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." That's what it looks like. If you go to the Bible and you open it up, the very first line of Genesis in the very first book of the Bible says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." But the original Hebrew word for word, if you do a word for word translation of the text, it doesn't actually say that. What it actually says, if you translate it correctly, is, "In the beginning, that which has no name or will never be named, created God." And if you listen very carefully to the passage that I have just read out to you, that says exactly the same thing. It specifically says that the one is what existed first, but not in the way that we understand existence. It was here already, and it's more than a God. It's more than God. But it's not possible for us to understand it. It's more than a God, and it's more than the God, and it created God. So let's pick out some more of what the passage says, and we'll just see if we can kind of understand it better in this way. If we're thinking about what is the nature of the one, okay, this is the way that the passage describes the nature of one. It pulls out I'm pulling out certain words so that we can look at them more closely. It talks about the nature of one being that there's an element of supremacy and completeness. So the one is depicted as the ultimate sovereign, greater than any god or entity. It's described as incorruptible and pure light. Pure light. You know how this concept of light keeps coming back, emphasizing its perfection and its absolute completeness. It's considered to be transcendent. So the one transcends all things. It's limitless, unfathomable, immeasurable, invisible, eternal, unutterable, and unnameable. These are all words that make it transcend far, far beyond any kind of human comprehension. And by comparison, we are very limited in our ability to understand anything that is, unnameable, unutterable, eternal, unfathomable, and immeasurable, and things like that. We just don't have the capability to understand it. And immediately, what that tells me straight away in that very same instance is that anyone who claims to know the answers about the source of us, because, there are lots of people out there who are making a good living by claiming to know the answers of where we came from and the source of creation and how it works and everything, what that immediately tells me is that they really don't know. They claim to know, but they don't know. They might think that they know. I'm not saying that they're doing anything shady. They may believe that they know, but they don't know because we're not capable of understanding it. And that's actually quite liberating. It means that we can just be restful and at peace with the fact that some things we just don't know. And that helps us to focus our energy on the things that we can know if we go on our search. And to be honest, this is exactly the same thing that the book of Zohar says. So one of the things about the book of Zohar is it kind of speaks in a way that makes it impossible for you to analyze. And it talks about how there are so many things that are impossible to know. And so we have an overlap here when it comes to the book of Zohar, which is the mystical Jewish text, and then the Gnostic understandings of reality. So they concur in some way. So let's also look at the one, this concept of the one, in terms of how it's described. So the attributes that it possesses. Okay, so the first attribute is immeasurable light. The one is referred to as immeasurable light, symbolizing purity, holiness, and incorruptibility. Let's look at this issue of incorruptibility and the light. The Book of Mary says that there's only one thing that's true and everything else is a lie. And if you find the light, then you will know the truth. And the reason why you will know the truth is because that light is incorruptible. It sounds a little bit as though when you search inside yourself, you know the right. You intuitively know what's right. And when you know what's right, you can't say or believe or act in the wrong way because you are incorruptible in that way. That's what it starts to sound like. And every person who finds that light inside them becomes more pure. So this immeasurable light is kind of eternal and it can't be measured. It's pure and it's holy and it's incorruptible. There's also this beyond comprehension element of the one. And the passage that I read out repeatedly states that the one can't be understood. It can't be measured. It can't be named by human standards. And that emphasizes its mystery and its incomprehensible kind of nature. But then also it has this concept of being non-corporeal, which is sort of non-worldly. And it's described as being neither worldly nor unworldly, neither large nor small, indicating that it transcends physical or even non-physical characteristics. So it's not an entity. The one is not an entity exactly. It not the way that we understand an entity to be. It's something beyond an entity. That's kind of curious, isn't it? Because even when you think about material and physical, we're still thinking of material and physical are things that are tangible. They're definitely, things are entities. They might be alive, they might be sentient, they may not be, but they're still tangible and physical. When we think of spiritual, we're still thinking about something that is an entity. The one transcends that as well. So it's not even spiritual. It's beyond that. And that's something that's really curious because we just don't even have anything to fall onto to be able to help us to understand that at all. So first the one came and then everything else. The one is portrayed as the source of all realms, life, blessedness, knowledge, goodness, mercy, redemption, and grace. Those are the words that appear in the passage. It sustains everything through immeasurable light. Light, light, light. You know, light. Light is the answer to everything, isn't it? Just like this E equals mc squared thing that I talked about at the top of the hour. Light is the link between energy and mass. Light is the frequency that makes up the speed of light that links energy or the spiritual world to mass or the material world. You see how science is nearly there. Science seems to get it. And quantum physics is the area of science that appears to be the closest to the truth. Because quantum physics is where the relationship between frequency and light appears, or light frequency and light speed in particular, appears to be getting closer to the answer. But the answer has existed already for thousands of years in the Gospel of John. It's just that it hasn't been found in a way that science recognizes. And that's what's so phenomenal about these Gnostic texts. It's a bit like trying to read your way through some crazy maze of double Dutch. It's really, really difficult to understand. But if you're a bit relentless, which I am, then you eventually get there. You just have to give yourself a series of headaches and sleepless nights trying to figure out what on earth am I reading. What it sounds is that, you know, between science and in particular quantum physics, that area of study, we are very, very close. We are very, very close to being able to understand things that were understood thousands of years ago in an entirely different way. Isn't that just incredible? And then there's this element in the passage about independence. The one is completely independent, requiring nothing from anything else. It exists in a state of absolute completeness and self-sufficiency. So it created itself, or it has already existed. It's always existed. So it's never not existed, because time is meaningless for the one. It can't be measured with time. And when I read that part of the passage, immediately I was taken back to ancient Egypt. So in my mind, there's a concept in ancient Egyptian mythology that talks about something kind of like this. The Egyptians believed in an ancient Egyptian god that created itself. It was called Atum, A-T-U-M, which sounds a bit like atom, doesn't it? Or maybe it sounds a bit like Adam from the Garden of Eden. And that's why it's always very curious how when things are named, they often appear to be named in ways that sound new, but are actually just a renaming of something very old that is similar, that preceded it. And in this case, the whole concept of science and the discovery of an atom, or the concept of religion and the creation of Adam by God, might actually be like a reinterpretation of something much older, like the very first Egyptian god called Atum. Maybe. According to Egyptian mythology, and this is another weird little play on words too, because Atum emerged from the primordial waters of chaos called Nun. But Atum was the very first thing, according to ancient mythology. And that's very strange because Nun is where Atum came from. But Nun sounds a lot like none, None, meaning zero, meaning nothing. So before we get to one, or before we get to anything really, before we get to any kind of reality, first there has to be none. Isn't it amazing? It's just really weird to see how words interplay, and it helps us to understand how our language kind of formed. So Atum, the god, the Egyptian god, the very first Egyptian god, Atum, emerged from none. And through self-creation, he brought forth the cosmos and other deities. So he created gods. This Egyptian mythology basically says that Atum created any of the gods that existed after him. In exactly the same way that the Gnostic principle of the One as the source of all creation went on to create God. Just like in Kabbalah and the book of Zohar, where it stated that which shall never be named or is impossible to name or which has no name, created God. And that God is actually the heavens and the earth that appear in the very first sentence of the book of Genesis, if it's correctly translated. So if it's correctly translated, Atum, who rose from none in Egyptian mythology, or that which shall never be named, that came first, or the one in the Gnostic text of John that created itself, is the thing, whatever it is, whether we're talking Egyptian, Gnostic, or Kabbalistic, that thing that came first came from nothing. And that is the thing that created God. If you translate the book of Genesis correctly, then the Bible agrees with that. But of course the Bible is not translated correctly. That sentence has been mistranslated. And I can say that very confidently because all you have to do, it's a short sentence. You just go and you do a word-for-word translation. And that's where you discover the truth. The Bible is a mistranslation of what actually appears to be the real method of creation of everything, in which reality was created. The heavens and the earth, the spiritual realm and the material realm, God, and the energy and mass and frequency that appears as light. And you see, I'm not even a scientist, okay? I have an education, yes. I have a Bachelor of Science in Urban Policy Development and a Master's in Policing. And I'm a pretty good researcher, but I'm not a scientist. But see how easy it is to get to the heart of things, of reality and the truth. You don't have to be a scientist. All you have to do is have the interest in the energy and the perseverance to peel away at the layers of distraction. Whether it be the distractions of religion or government or whatever the latest YouTube guru is trying to convince you. And that's the reason why I'll never bother wasting my time listening or watching, AI-generated YouTube channels because they have lovely imagery and the voiceover is serene and sounds very clever. But it's all just superficial mumbo jumbo in the end. And it's incredibly superficial. And whenever I accidentally end up watching one, I get very bored very quickly with the messaging, because it's just regurgitating the same thing over and over again with a different kind of voiceover. My idea of watching something of value is when a person, like kind of like me here on this show, where I'm giving myself a brain hemorrhage doing all this research, but you know what? It's amazing, and I love to see other people doing that too. They've gone out there and they've actually looked and they've scratched and they've spent hours analyzing and examining and trying and questioning and getting to the bottom of things, and they find a nugget of truth, and it's something that they can be very proud of, that they discovered it, even if they've discovered it for the first time for themselves and other people knew it before. That's why I love to watch people, and I love to listen to people who've done the legwork rather than some bland kind of AI generated expert on everything. No, I'm afraid. Because the simple truth is out there, and it's accessible for everyone, anyone, regardless of whether you're educated or rich or powerful. You just need to be willing to look. And in a way, that's kind of what the Gnostic texts have said. This is the third one I'm looking at now. And they all say the same thing. They all say that when you begin to find the answer, when you begin to look for the light, it appears like a revelation inside you. And that's one of the reasons why I do this. So this Egyptian god Atum is an example of exactly what the secret book of John is describing to be the earliest thing before anything existed, except it wasn't a thing. It transcended beyond anything that we can understand, and it created everything. It created everything. It even created God. So God is a creation. And that is profound. That's profound. And so finally, in the passage, the one is described as a concept of ineffability. It is inexpressible. It's unutterable. It can't be expressed through words, just like the book of Zohar, just like in the very first sentence of the Bible of the book of Genesis. If you disregard the way scholars have officially translated the Bible and look at the actual ancient Hebrew wording, that is the way it appears to be. The one is just something that is impossible to express or understand. And the one is also described as a concept of majesty and purity, which is divine and transcendent and just frustratingly impossible to get in any way. But it is the source of everything else. And so it is what it is. It is what it is. So how fascinating and mysterious is that? The one, the single source of all things, is the discussion of this, the way that it's described, is kind of palpable. And when I was reading it and trying to wrap my head around it, it kind of brought up emotions that feel really true and real. I don't necessarily know what I'm reading at first, but I feel as though there's something there. And very, very different to when I was reading the Bible. Very, very different. When I was reading the Bible, I was thinking, God, check out all these words, man. And why are they name dropping all of these men? You know, it's very, very different. The Bible had a purpose of trying to convince us of something and trying to tell a story from someone's point of view. But the Gnostic texts seem to be so raw and so real. It's very, very different. So then the very next thing that happens in the Gospel of John is that this is something that can be described quite well with words. And this is the concept of Barbelo. Now, I've covered Barbelo in a previous episode. I think it might be one that's called The Secret Female God. And I will make sure that a link to that episode is also attached to the description of this show. But briefly, Barbelo is a female concept of divine emanation. She was the first god. If you want to think of it as a physical or a spiritual or a godlike emanation. So, we think of God in a certain way or a God in a certain way. It's not clear whether that is exactly the way that she appears. You can perceive it to be physical, you can perceive it to be spiritual, or you can perceive it to be godlike. But she was the first emanation that came from the One. And we can only really work with the words that we know because, we're humans and therefore we're limited. But this is the story of the emergence of Barbelo. I'm going to just skip through it really quickly because I've done an entire episode of it in a previous show. So Barbelo was a thought that came from what we could understand to be the mind of the One. Okay, the mind of the source of all things. And Barbelo in the book of John is described to be the universal womb of all things, which I think, the universal womb would indicate that everything is birthed from Barbelo. The origin of all creation, in a way. What's very important to understand about Barbelo is she is androgynous. So I'm referring to her as a she, and she often appears as a feminine divine element in descriptions of her. But she is androgynous. She is the foundational aspect of everything else in Gnosticism. So Barbelo is a very important character when it comes to understanding the Gnostic belief system. And so Barbelo, the episode I did on Barbelo, is the place that you want to go if you want to understand the foundational elements of Gnosticism, okay, outside of any individual gospel. And interesting, Barbelo, this is an interesting nugget. Barbelo is completely ignored in all of the Abrahamic religions. It's like she never happened. They just skip over her. They ignore the concept of her androgyny, of original thought. And in fact, they kind of, the religions also appear to be kind of afraid of this concept of androgyny. And I wonder if that is related to the reason why she's been left out. You know what they say about fear? Yeah, they say fear is an acknowledgement of the power of what you're afraid of. So it's an immediate lesson for us on how we should interpret fear and hostility that's, bringing this back down to earth, that's directed towards gender or affirmation of gender or gender blending or absence of gender. It seems that this fear is embedded within us because it goes all the way back to the very first thing that emanated from this original source creator. It can't be denied, and therefore it's a hatred or a fear instead. I think Barbelo, there's a resentment that appears to have occurred right from that first moment of the existence of anything, and it's carried us forward to today. It might even be, interestingly, the reason why women have historically been suppressed or undermined or ignored or transacted or feared or blamed or hated or claimed as a possession. Whenever it becomes necessary to overshadow them with this patriarchal kind of construct that people are prone to believe in, it might actually stem all the way back from the very first thing, which was Barbelo, and the fact that there's no acknowledgement of her anywhere in the official belief systems. Maybe people were, envious of her because she was first. People just don't like to come second. I don't know. So maybe they compensate in really weird ways, and it's just been continuing on for thousands of years. Anyway, I've kind of veered off track. So, why not? I'm human. Let's just veer off for a second. But then let's come back. The best way to describe Barbelo in today's show is just to list the things that she stands for. Her glorification, her invisibility, her foreknowledge or divine insight and wisdom, the incorruptibility that she represents. For example, she will never decay. She's eternal. Her eternal life and eternal truth. So she is eternal life and she is eternal truth. And Barbelo might also be the guardian or aspect of reality that relates to the soul. That single soul that everyone is an aspect of. She is the possessor of the eternal womb, or she is the eternal womb. And that womb might actually be the soul. So you're separating the soul from the spirit or the ego or the physical manifestation of life, because they are separate things. And so if we're looking at the soul in isolation, Barbelo may actually be that single soul that has always been and will always be, and the spirit and the ego do their own thing, but then everything always assimilates back to the soul. That means that Barbelo becomes the framework for the realm of existence, according to the Gnostics. So we have the source, which is the one, which is the source of all creation, but the source or the one has no name, can't be understood, is unfathomable, unknowable, unseeable, and never ends, has never begun, and yet has always been. And the emanation of Barbelo begins to provide us with a realm from which everything else derives. And the secret Gospel of John describes this realm as the realm of five. So it has 5 components to it. The realm of 5 is made up of 5 elements that make everything else possible. And those 5 elements are represented by Barbelo. So the 5 elements are, they are androgynous by nature, indicating a balance of unity between male and female principles. Okay, so think your feminine and masculine divine united together to create this androgynous truth of everything. And they consist of forethought, foreknowledge, incorruptibility, life eternal, and truth. So they are perpetual. They never stop. And they are always as they are, regardless of anything else. And those are the foundational aspects of reality that form the basic framework for everything else. And everything else is what we're going to cover next week. So join me next week and we will be discussing the creation of the cosmos, the earth, and humanity through the eyes of the secret Gospel of John, and how the message of our purpose and our future is translated through John in Gnosticism, in this secret book that was banned by the church. Isn't it funny how such beautiful, eloquent, gentle books about simple things posed such a massive threat to certain people or beings that they ended up choosing to leave them out of a book filled with, that they ended up canonizing, which was filled with violence and anger and hatred and suffering. And yet, what could be so threatening about the Gnostic teachings that they were deemed heretical? There's not one act of violence. There's not one element of hatred in any of these books that I've seen so far. And it even got to the point where anyone who possessed these Gnostic texts would be killed because they were considered to be a heretic. It makes them all the more fascinating, in my view, don't you think? My name is Ellie, and you can find me at Ellie Dreams and Under on YouTube. Thank you to everyone who is listening today on one of KGRA's broadcasting platforms. If you would like to be a member of KGRA and watch your favorite shows in the company of like-minded watchers, experiencers, spiritualists, or weirdos like me, just go to kgradb.com and enter promo code Ellie to get 30% off your subscription. You know that I've taken the red pill, don't you? Yeah, I've taken the red pill. That's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.